In the 1690s in England, half of every wheat crop vanished before harvest, and famine haunted every village. Yet when a sickly lawyer named Jethro Tull dared to challenge divine tradition, farmers set fire to his invention, a public act of destruction, even as their own wheat secretly multiplied behind closed gates. If Tull really tripled yields, why did his breakthrough start with public destruction and end in private profit? In the next minutes, we will expose the truth behind the myth and reveal how a revolution took root where nobody wanted to admit it. Across the English countryside in the late 17th century, the struggle for survival played out in every furrow. Wheat fields, the backbone of rural life, promised little more than disappointment. Farmers scattered seed by hand, tossing grain across open ground and hoping for the best. The wind carried kernels away, rain washed them into gullies, and hungry birds picked through the shallow earth. For every sack sown, nearly half vanished before a single shoot appeared. The numbers were relentless. Out of every 2 bushels of seed, only 1 might take root. Wheat yields hovered at 8 to 10 bushels per acre, barely enough to feed a family, let alone supply a growing nation. Villages watched their stores dwindle with each failed harvest. A cold spring or a flock of starlings could tip a parish from hardship into hunger. Population growth after 1650 only sharpened the edge. More mouths to feed, but no new methods to keep up. Land was precious, and every acre had to count. Yet the ancient practice of broadcasting seed, unchanged for generations, guaranteed waste. Fields looked wild and uneven, with patches of bare earth and tangled weeds. The randomness of it all was a gamble, and the odds never seemed to improve. Famine was not a distant threat but a recurring visitor. Church records filled with pleas for grain relief, while grain prices soared and fell with the weather. In some years, the poorest families survived on little more than boiled roots and charity bread. The memory of empty granaries haunted the countryside. No one could afford to experiment. To fail at planting meant risking a winter of hunger. Behind closed doors, landowners worried over ledgers that never balanced. Seed was expensive and precious, yet so much disappeared into the ground for nothing. Laborers worked from dawn to dusk, yet the fields yielded little reward. The cycle dragged on, year after year, with no sign of change. Across England, the sense of desperation deepened. The land gave what it always had, just enough to keep hope alive, never enough to lift the shadow of want. Jethro Tull entered the world in 1674, far from the muddy furrows that would later define his legacy. His early years were shaped not by the rhythms of planting and harvest, but by the quiet discipline of books and debate. At Oxford, he studied the classics. Law followed at Gray's Inn, where he trained as a barrister. His mind was sharpened by argument, not by the weight of a plow. No family tradition tied him to the land. His path to farming came by accident, not by birthright. Illness forced a change. Weak lungs and lingering pain made the city impossible, so Tull retreated to his father's farm in Oxfordshire. The countryside was meant to offer rest, but instead it stirred his curiosity. He watched as laborers scattered grain by hand, trusting chance to carry each kernel to fertile soil. The waste troubled him. Seed was precious, yet so much vanished before it could grow. He could not accept that this was simply the way of things. Tull's training as a lawyer left him skeptical of tradition for tradition's sake. He questioned why success in the fields was left to luck, or to the whims of weather and fate. The prevailing wisdom blamed poor harvests on God's will or the mysterious balance of nature. Farmers prayed for rain, for sun, for deliverance from blight, but rarely for better methods. To Tull, this reliance on providence seemed like surrender. He wondered if the problem lay not in the heavens, but in the hands that sowed the seed. He read widely, searching for answers beyond the parish boundaries. He found inspiration in unlikely places, accounts of vineyards in France and Italy where careful cultivation produced reliable abundance. He began to see the field as a system, not a mystery. If every seed could be placed with intention, if every furrow followed a plan, perhaps chance could be replaced with certainty. This kind of thinking set him apart. Neighbors viewed him with suspicion, a gentleman tinkering with matters best left to experience. He had no agricultural pedigree, no inherited wisdom. Yet it was precisely this outsider perspective that allowed him to see what others missed. Where others saw the field as a place of hope and hazard, Tull saw a puzzle waiting to be solved. He was not content to accept the limits of the land. Instead, he began to imagine how reason and a bit of machinery could change everything. In 1701, Jethro Tull rolled a curious machine out onto the fields of Oxfordshire. It looked nothing like the heavy wooden plows or battered harrows that had shaped English soil for centuries. At its heart was a simple idea. Every seed deserves a place, and every row should follow a plan. Tull's seed drill worked by precision, not by luck. An iron coulter at the front sliced neat furrows into the earth, 3 at a time. Behind it, a notched wooden cylinder rotated as the machine moved, releasing seeds from hoppers above. Each kernel dropped into its own channel, spaced evenly, protected from the wind and the birds. As the drill advanced, a trailing blade swept soil back over the furrows, tucking the seeds in at just the right depth. This was more than clever mechanics. The seed drill cut waste to a fraction of what hand sowing demanded. Where broadcasting lost almost half the grain, Tull's drill used only what was needed, sometimes saving 2/3 of the seed. That meant less money scattered to the crows and more grain reserved for the market. The uniform rows it left behind were not just tidy. They made it possible to run a hoe cleanly between the lines, breaking up weeds and letting air reach the roots. Tull's machine was built for repeatability. Every pass of the drill delivered the same result, season after season, without relying on a steady hand or a lucky day. This repeatability created efficiency on a scale farmers had not seen. Tull had no blueprint to copy. He borrowed ideas from vineyard keepers in France, watched how they spaced their vines and cultivated their soil. But the final design was his own, a lawyer's logic welded to a farmer's need. The seed drill did not just promise efficiency. It offered control in a world where harvests had always been ruled by chaos. For the first time, the act of planting could be measured, planned, and improved. With each turn of the wheels, Jethro Tull was rewriting the rules of the English field. On the fields of Oxfordshire, results spoke louder than any argument. Where neighboring farms struggled to coax 10 bushels of wheat from an acre, Tull's plots began to yield 20, sometimes 30, a harvest that seemed almost impossible. The change was not subtle. Each row planted by his drill rose in a straight green line, every stalk spaced with mechanical regularity. The usual patchwork of bare spots and tangled weeds gave way to dense, even growth. Seed that once vanished to birds and wind now took root in nearly every furrow. Fewer kernels were needed, yet more wheat filled the granaries at season's end. The numbers were undeniable, at least to anyone with access to Tull's ledgers. By planting at precise depths and intervals, he cut seed costs by more than half. The savings freed up grain for sale, not just for replanting. Crops matured at the same pace and resisted the heavy summer rains that often flattened weaker, uneven stands. Tull's wheat ripened together, making harvest faster and more reliable. Over 13 straight years, he grew wheat on the same ground without the usual break for fallow, a feat that defied every rule of English farming. The land, instead of wearing out, seemed to grow stronger with each season of careful cultivation. These results were not widely advertised. Tull kept his figures close, sharing them only with a few trusted landowners or curious visitors. But word spread in whispers and rumors. Someone in Oxfordshire was pulling twice the grain from the same tired soil. The old talk of luck and providence faded, replaced by questions about drills and rows. For those who saw the harvests firsthand, there was no going back. The evidence lay in the full sacks, the tidy rows, and the books balanced at last. Tull's machine had rewritten what was possible and made it impossible to ignore the gap between tradition and transformation. Rumors spread faster than any machine. In the villages and market towns of Oxfordshire, Tull's seed drill became a lightning rod for fear and suspicion. The sight of straight rows, so regular and unnatural to the old eye, unsettled neighbors who believed good fields should look wild, shaped by the hand and the wind. Stories began to circulate, some half-joking, some bitter, about the madness of burying seed with iron instead of trusting the scatter of the human hand. Yet behind the laughter, anxiety ran deep. The new machine did not just change the soil, it threatened the order of rural life. Where hand sowing demanded a team of laborers, the seed drill needed only one man and a horse to cover the same ground. The numbers were simple but brutal. Fewer hands meant fewer wages, and fewer wages meant empty tables in cottages that had always survived by the rhythm of the seasons. For many, the drill was not just a tool but a warning. The future might not have room for everyone. Folklore took over where facts could not reach. Tales of seed drills burned in effigy or mocked in village festivals captured the anger that had no other outlet. Whether those bonfires ever truly lit the night, the idea of destroying the machine became a symbol, a way to push back against forces that felt as unstoppable as the turning of the year. Fields planted in neat rows drew jeers from passers-by, and some laborers, when left unsupervised, quietly returned to scattering seed by hand, clinging to the old ways, even as the evidence piled up in their neighbors' granaries. Community leaders and tenant farmers faced a bitter choice. Publicly, they joined in the ridicule, denouncing the drill as an affront to nature and God. Privately, some watched the harvests with envy, calculating what those extra bushels might mean for their own survival. Resistance was not just stubbornness, it was a fight for economic life, a desperate attempt to hold on to the fragile balance that had kept families afloat for generations. In the shadow of the seed drill, tradition and necessity collided, and the fields became a battleground for the soul of rural England. In 1731, Jethro Tull put his theories into print. The book Horse-Hoeing Husbandry read more like a challenge than a manual. Tull argued for row planting and relentless hoeing, insisting that pulverized soil alone could feed crops better than any manure. The reaction was swift and sharp. Pamphlets and periodicals filled with scorn, dismissing Tull as a meddling amateur with dangerous ideas. Critics pointed to his lack of agricultural training, attacking his logic while sidestepping the results sprouting from his own fields. Yet while the ink of ridicule dried, a different story was taking shape behind estate walls. Large landowners, those with the most to gain and the least to fear, began to experiment quietly. Copies of Tull's book appeared in manor libraries. In blacksmith shops, craftsmen studied the seed drill's diagrams, building their own versions or tinkering with improvements. Some even claimed the design as their own, selling drills to neighboring estates while keeping Tull's name out of the conversation. By the 1740s, drills moved across the countryside in silence. On the surface, leading families continued to mock Tull's theories at society dinners and in local papers. But in the privacy of their farms, they planted in rows, counted the savings in seed, and watched their ledgers turn from red to black. Tenant farmers, pressured to keep up, found themselves using tools copied from the very book their landlords dismissed. The gap between public scorn and private adoption widened, exposing the uneasy bargain at the heart of rural progress: ridicule in the open, imitation in the fields. By the middle of the 18th century, English agriculture was feeding more people than ever before. The ledgers of large estates showed a steady climb in grain surpluses, even as the acreage under the plow barely changed. Between 1700 and 1750, national output rose in ways that could not be explained by weather, luck, or new land alone. The old cycle of feast and famine began to loosen its hold, and food prices settled into a steadier rhythm. Fewer families faced the threat of hunger each winter. The numbers, traced across county records and merchant accounts, told a story that public opinion refused to admit. Something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface of rural life. Planting methods, once a private matter, became the quiet engine of a new prosperity. On farms that had adopted the drill, often without fanfare and rarely with open credit to its inventor, yields climbed year after year. Fewer seeds were wasted. Harvests arrived on time, with uniform ripening and less risk of disaster. The labor force shrank, but the food supply grew. Freed from endless days in the fields, rural workers drifted toward towns and new trades, fueling the first sparks of industrial growth. The countryside was changing, not through revolution, but through the silent spread of a better idea. Jethro Tull did not live to see this transformation. He died in 1741, criticized in print, dismissed by many as a crank, and left without honors or reward. Yet the arithmetic he set in motion outlasted every insult. As the grain bins filled and the old fears faded, the logic of his machine became impossible to ignore. The world moved on, quietly, in the direction he had pointed, proving once again that numbers have a way of burying doubt long after the doubters have gone. Today, every mechanized field traces its order back to a machine once mocked and denied. Innovation still faces public scorn and private imitation, especially when it threatens power or jobs. The seed drill's impact reminds us progress does not wait for permission. In the end, numbers rewrite tradition. What change are we quietly adopting while pretending it does not exist? Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.